You are merely a good wife, but business is not the place for you," Julian declared right in front of the board as he fired me from the company we built together. He forgot that while he was the face, I was the brain. And when the brain stops functioning, the body dies. I did not argue. I simply smiled, stepped back, and watched his $2 billion empire crumble in exactly 30 days. My name is Elena Vance. At 34 years old, I possess a net worth that exists mostly on paper and a title that most of New York high society politely ignores. To the world, I am the quiet woman standing in the shadow of a giant. But on the legal documents buried deep within the corporate registry of Delaware, I am the co-founder and chief technology officer of Stratum Logic. The air in our penthouse always smells of expensive lilies and old money, a scent I have grown to detest because it masks the rot underneath. If you walk past any newsstand in Manhattan today, you will see my husband's face plastered on the cover of Forbes. Julian Thorne, the golden boy of biotech, the visionary. He has that perfect jawline and the kind of charisma that makes investors open their checkbooks before he even finishes a sentence. They call him a genius. They say Stratum Logic is his masterpiece. It is almost laughable to me now. Julian barely knows how to restart his own laptop without calling IT support. The truth is much colder and far less photogenic. The Neuralink algorithm, the proprietary technology that pushed our valuation to $2 billion, was not born in a glass-walled conference room. It was born in a damp basement in Queens, where I spent 5 years of my life typing until my fingers bled. While Julian was out networking and charming venture capitalists with buzzwords he memorized from my notes, I was the one building the bridge between human neural networks and digital interfaces. I let him take the credit. I stepped back into the shadows because I loved him, and I knew how fragile his male ego truly was. I played the part of the supportive wife, the silent partner who nodded politely at galas while he soaked up the applause. I told myself that his happiness was my happiness. My life became a bizarre duality. By day, I was the trophy wife, dismissed by the wives of other executives as nothing more than a lucky accessory. By night, while Julian slept the deep sleep of the self-satisfied, I was awake. I was the chief architect, silently logging into the servers to patch the holes Julian had promised to clients without consulting me. I fixed the impossible deadlines he agreed to. I cleaned up his messes. But success is a dangerous drug. Somewhere along the line, Julian started believing his own press releases. He stopped asking for my input. He started treating me like an employee he could not quite figure out how to fire. He began to strut around the office like he was the next Steve Jobs, convinced that his reality distortion field was actually engineering talent. The cracks in the foundation appeared 2 weeks ago. I found a draft of the S1 filing for our upcoming initial public offering on his desk. It was a restructuring plan. As I flipped through the pages, my heart hammered against my ribs. My name was missing from the list of founding shareholders. He was erasing me. Then came last Tuesday. It was the 10-year anniversary of the day we wrote the very first line of code for Neuralink. I expected a quiet dinner, perhaps a moment of shared nostalgia. Instead, Julian threw a lavish victory party for a new round of funding. I stood by his side, holding a glass of champagne that tasted like vinegar. When a major investor asked him about my role in the early days, Julian did not even flinch. Elena. Oh, she was wonderful, Julian said, flashing that $1 million smile. She was my rock. Mostly logistics support, keeping me fed and watered while I did the heavy lifting. I felt the blood drain from my face. Logistics support. I looked at him, searching for a hint of a joke, but his eyes were glassy with arrogance. Logistics, I whispered, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Don't be modest, darling. He laughed, patting my arm condescendingly. That was the moment the switch flipped. I did not scream. I did not throw my drink in his face. I simply went numb. I watched him circulate the room, shaking hands and accepting praise for work he did not understand. In my mind, I was no longer his wife. I was a programmer looking at a corrupted line of code. Julian was no longer my partner. He was a bug, and as any good engineer knows, when you find a critical bug in the system, you do not get angry. You isolate it, you analyze it, and then you delete it. The air in the boardroom was always kept at a freezing temperature, but that morning, the chill felt personal. We were gathered to finalize the shareholder list for the initial public offering, a moment that should have been the pinnacle of my career. Instead, it became my execution. Julian stood at the head of the long mahogany table, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with the casual confidence of a man holding a royal flush. He did not look at me. He looked at the investors. In preparation for our public debut, Stratum Logic requires a leadership team that reflects our dynamic future, Julian announced, his voice smooth and practiced. It is with a heavy heart that I announce Elena will be taking an early retirement effective immediately. The pressure of the startup phase has taken a toll on her. Fragile health. She needs time to address her severe nervous exhaustion. I sat frozen in my leather chair. Nervous exhaustion. It was a brilliant lie. It painted me as unstable, a liability to the shareholders, while casting him as the benevolent husband making a tough choice for his wife's well-being. Before I could even open my mouth to object, the double doors swung open. Please welcome our new Chief Strategy Officer and Acting Head of Technology, Monica Dean, Julian said, finally meeting my eyes with a challenging stare. Monica walked in. She was 24, stunning, and possessed a resume filled with marketing triumphs but void of a single day of coding experience. I knew her. I knew her perfume because it lingered on Julian's shirts when he came home late from client dinners. She smiled at the board, a predatory grin masked by lip gloss. The board members, men whose fortunes I had built with my bare hands, nodded in approval. They saw a fresh face for the magazines. They saw a younger, more marketable image. They did not care that she could not distinguish between a server and a hard drive. Julian slid a thick manila envelope across the table toward me. It stopped inches from my hands. This is a separation agreement, he said. It includes a generous severance package and, of course, a standard non-compete clause. You are barred from working for any competitor or starting a rival firm for 5 years. I opened the folder. The severance was insulting. It was less than 1% of what my shares would be worth after the public offering, but it was the look on his face that cut deeper than the financial theft. He looked relieved. He looked like he was finally discarding an old piece of furniture that clashed with his new decor. I did not scream. I did not throw the heavy glass pitcher of water at him, though the thought crossed my mind. I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch until the air in the room grew thin. Julian, I said softly, locking eyes with him. Are you absolutely certain you want me to leave completely? Julian laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the glass walls. He leaned in, lowering his voice so only those closest could hear the venom. The company needs professionals. Elena, you were just lucky to tag along with me from the beginning. Honestly, you are dead weight now. Go home and rest. I see, I replied. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my favorite fountain pen. I flipped to the last page of the agreement. The board watched, expecting tears, expecting a scene. Instead, I signed my name with a steady hand, but right below my signature, in the small margin that Julian was too arrogant to check, I added a tiny reference code, C Clause 12, Section 4 of Founding Charter. It was written in a specific blue-black ink that looked standard but would be legally binding. I capped the pen and stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, the only loud noise I made. Good luck, gentlemen. You will need it, I said. I walked out of the boardroom and went straight to my office. I did not touch the computer. I did not shred a single document. I simply picked up the small succulent plant from my desk and the framed photo of us from 10 years ago, back when we were eating ramen and dreaming of changing the world. I looked at the photo one last time, then placed it face down in the trash bin. I walked out of the building with my head held high, leaving behind the code, the servers, and the husband who thought he had won. He had no idea that by forcing me out, He had just pulled the pin on a grenade he was holding in his own hand, the moment the elevator doors closed, sealing me off from the Stratum Logic offices for the last time. I did not call my mother, and I certainly did not call a therapist. I dialed Marcus. Marcus was my oldest friend from university, a man Julian had openly mocked for the last decade. Julian called him a loser and a bleeding heart because Marcus chose to work for nonprofit organizations protecting digital privacy rather than chasing stock options in Silicon Valley. But Julian's arrogance made him blind. He never realized that Marcus was legally brilliant, and more importantly, Marcus was the only person who hated Julian's ego as much as I did. "It is done," Marcus asked the moment he picked up. His voice was calm, steady, like a sniper waiting for the wind to die down. "He fired me, Marcus. He actually did it. He handed me the separation agreement, smirked, and told me to go rest. He thinks I am broken," I said, letting a small, cold laugh escape my lips. "Does he know about the IP addendum? He has no idea. He never reads the fine print." He was too busy staring at Monica's legs to notice the clause in the founding charter 10 years ago, and he certainly did not notice the license renewal update 3 years ago. That was the secret weapon. 3 years ago, when I first found a receipt for a diamond bracelet that never made it to my wrist, I knew Julian was straying. I did not confront him then. Instead, I quietly restructured the ownership of the Neuralink algorithm. On paper, Stratum Logic appeared to own everything. In reality, the company only held a renewable operating license. The actual intellectual property, the source code itself, remained the personal property of one Elena Vance, and the kill switch was embedded in the very definition of the license. "Read it to me again." "Marcus, I need to hear it," I said as I stepped out into the blinding New York sunlight. I could hear the rustle of papers on the other end. Clause 7. Section B. Marcus read, "The license to utilize the Neuralink architecture is granted to Stratum Logic on the strict condition that the licensor, Elena Vance, retains the position of Chief Technology Officer. Upon the termination of the licensor's employment for any reason, this license is automatically and immediately revoked." "Perfect," I whispered. "Do you want me to file the cease and desist order?" Now Marcus asked, "We can shut them down by 5 this afternoon." "No," I replied, hailing a cab. "Not yet. If we sue now, he will spin it as a legal battle. He will play the victim. I want him to feel it first. I want him to sit in the captain's chair, turn the wheel, and realize, the engine is gone. Let him drive the ship off the cliff." I threw my old SIM card into a sewer grate before getting into the taxi. I gave the driver an address in Tribeca, a location Julian did not know existed. It was a penthouse I had purchased 2 years ago using the proceeds from an early investment in cryptocurrency. While Julian was buying leased Ferraris to look rich, I had been converting Ethereum into real estate. The apartment was sparse, modern, and silent. It was my sanctuary. That evening, social media was flooded with photos from the Stratum Logic headquarters. Julian and Monica were throwing a party. I saw pictures of them popping vintage champagne, toasting to the new era of the company. They looked euphoric. They believed they had trimmed the fat. They believed they had removed the tired old wife who was holding them back. I turned off the tablet and poured myself a cup of herbal tea. For the next week, my routine was shockingly peaceful. I went to a high-end spa. I practiced yoga for 2 hours every morning. I slept 8 hours a night for the first time in a decade. But while I was finding my center, my secret phone was buzzing on the coffee table. I had set it up to receive the system administrator alerts from Stratum's servers, a ghost access I had never relinquished. Alert server latency high. Alert Neuralink core module unreachable. Warning data packet loss at 15%. I glanced at the screen, saw the red text flashing like a heartbeat in distress, and simply swiped it away. I imagined Monica staring at the monitors, her perfect manicure hovering over a keyboard she did not understand, wondering why the system was slowing down. "Let it burn," I whispered to the empty room. I sat down at my personal workstation, a custom rig that was far more powerful than anything in Julian's office. I did not open the old Neuralink files. That was the past. I opened a blank terminal. My fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, feeling the familiar hum of potential. I began to type. I was not just going to watch Julian fail. I was building something new, something faster, something that would make Neuralink look like a pocket calculator. I was writing the future, and this time, my name would be on the door. The first week of my absence was, ironically, the best week of Julian's life. I watched him on CNBC, sitting in that plush leather chair, crossing his legs and smiling at the camera with the ease of a man who believed his own mythology. He talked about synergy and leaner management structures. He told the world that Stratum Logic was entering a golden era of efficiency. It was a beautiful performance. But that is the thing about complex systems. Momentum carries them forward for a while, even after the engine has died. By day 8, the momentum ran out. My former team, a group of brilliant but specialized engineers, started encountering the ghosts in the machine. These were deep-level recursion errors that I used to patch manually every Sunday night while Julian was sleeping. Without my silent maintenance, the code began to knot itself. I heard from a junior developer who I still had on a secure chat channel that the engineering team went to Monica for guidance when the first red flags appeared on the dashboard. Just reboot the server cluster, Monica commanded, waving her hand dismissively as she checked her makeup in her compact mirror. It is probably just a cache issue. Why do you always complicate things? It was not a cache issue. It was a kernel panic. Rebooting the system without stabilizing the core caused the temporary redundancy logs to wipe themselves clean. The system did not just stutter, it screamed. Then the phone calls started. Our biggest client, the National Hospital System, did not care about Julian's jawline or Monica's marketing jargon. They cared that the patient vitals on their monitors were updating with a 15-second delay. In the world of high-stakes trauma surgery, 15 seconds is the difference between a pulse and a corpse. The hospital administrator called Julian personally, screaming so loud that his voice could be heard through the glass walls of the CEO's office. Panic is a funny thing. It strips away the veneer of sophistication instantly. Julian realized he needed the root access keys. He needed the master password to override the latency protocols. He assumed I was sitting at home, crying into a pillow, waiting for him to call so I could be useful again. He dialed my number. Once. Twice. 10 times. He got nothing but the automated operator telling him the number was out of service. Furious. He drove to our old penthouse. He stormed past the doorman, demanding to be let up, expecting to find me wallowing in misery. Instead, he opened the door to an empty shell. The furniture was gone. The art was gone. The closet, once filled with the designer dresses he forced me to wear, was bare. I had erased myself from his life as thoroughly as I had erased my fingerprints from the office. Back at Stratum Logic, the whispers turned into open ridicule. The staff knew what was happening. They called it the decapitation. They whispered that the brain had left the building, leaving the face to stare blankly at the monitors. The gray market valuation of our pre-IPO shares, which had been climbing steadily for months, began to wobble. Rumors of catastrophic technical debt leaked onto the message boards. Desperation makes people stupid. Instead of admitting defeat, Julian committed a crime. Late on Friday night, he brought in a team of outside consultants. They were not legitimate security experts. They were a red team of black hat hackers he hired off the books. He gave them a simple order break into the source code. "I don't care how you do it," Julian yelled at them, slamming his fist on the conference table, his face red with a mix of fear and rage. "Just crack the damn thing open. She locked me out of my own company. He was trying to brute force his way into my encrypted partitions. He did not realize that by trying to pick the lock, he was about to trigger the security system's self-defense mechanism. He was playing with fire, and he had forgotten that I was the one who built the burning house. When technical competence failed, Julian resorted to the only weapon he truly knew how to wield: manipulation. Unable to fix the crumbling infrastructure of stratum logic, he decided to find a scapegoat. I sat in my penthouse, sipping jasmine tea, and watched him give a press conference that would have won him an Academy Award. He stood behind a podium, looking suitably exhausted and heartbroken, the perfect image of a betrayed leader. "We have discovered that the recent system instability is not a bug," Julian told the reporters, pausing to wipe a non-existent tear from his eye. "It is sabotage. We have evidence that malicious code was planted by a disgruntled former executive who allowed personal jealousy to overshadow professional ethics." He did not name me directly in that sentence, but he did not have to. Within hours, the narrative was spun. He hired a fleet of social media influencers and key opinion leaders to spread the poison. Suddenly, anonymous articles appeared on gossip sites claiming that I was mentally unstable, that I had been committed to a facility for nervous breakdowns, and that I was nothing more than a gold digger who had ridden Julian's coattails to success. The internet, a beast that feeds on outrage, turned on me instantly. I was no longer the silent co-founder. I was the saboteur, the mad woman in the attic, the vindictive ex-wife trying to burn down a genius's legacy. My phone, which I had kept on a private setting, began to light up with calls from the few friends and family members who had my new number. My mother called, her voice thick with panic. "Elena, please, you have to say something," she cried over the line. "They are calling you a monster. They say you destroyed the hospital data on purpose. Why are you letting him do this? Let them talk." "Mom," I said, my voice steady. "Just trust me. I need him to feel safe. I need him to think he has won." I hung up and refused to issue a statement. My silence was interpreted by the public as an admission of guilt. The world screamed for my head, but I remained a ghost. And then, Julian made the mistake I had been praying for. He got greedy. A process server arrived at my lobby with a thick envelope. Julian had filed a civil lawsuit against me. He was suing me for damages related to corporate sabotage and destruction of intellectual property. The sum he was demanding was staggering $100 million. I held the papers in my hand and smiled. He had just legally compelled me to defend myself. He had opened the door to the courtroom, and in doing so, he had invited the truth in. I called Marcus immediately. He took the bait. I said, "I have the filing right here," Marcus replied, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. "He is accusing you of destroying company property. This means we have to prove ownership of said property to defend you. He just handed us the gun. Elena, call his legal team." I instructed. "Tell them I am terrified. Tell them I cannot afford a long trial and I want to settle. Request a mediation meeting before the court date. But make one condition non-negotiable." "The board?" Marcus asked. "The board," I confirmed. "I want the entire board of directors present. Tell them I want to apologize to everyone in person and offer my help to fix the code as part of the settlement." Marcus made the call. 10 minutes later, he called me back. Julian had agreed immediately. Of course he did. In his mind, I was the broken woman coming to crawl back to him. He thought I was going to beg for mercy and offer to work for free just to save my reputation. He thought he was about to get his slave back. They set the meeting for tomorrow morning at 9. Marcus said, "Elena, are you ready for this? I have been ready for 10 years. "Marcus," I said. I looked at the lawsuit again. $100 million. It was a lot of money. But tomorrow, Julian was going to learn that some things cost far more than money. Tomorrow, the bill for his arrogance would finally come due. The elevator ride to the 50th floor felt different this time. For a decade, I had ridden this lift as a servant to the company, worrying about server loads and coding deadlines. Today, I rode it as an executioner. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the main conference room, a fishbowl of glass that offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and premature victory. Julian sat at the head of the table, flanked by Monica and a phalanx of 6 lawyers in charcoal suits. They looked like sharks smelling blood in the water. They expected a broken woman. They expected me to walk in wearing sweatpants, eyes red from crying, begging for mercy. I walked in wearing a tailored white suit that cost more than Monica's annual salary. My hair was pulled back in a sleek, sharp bun, and my face was devoid of makeup save for a bold red lip. I saw Julian's eyes widen slightly. He blinked, momentarily thrown off script by the sight of his fragile wife looking like a warrior queen. I took the seat at the opposite end of the table, Marcus settling calmly beside me. I did not say a word. I simply placed my hands on the table and waited. Julian cleared his throat, rearranging his features into a mask of pity. "Elena," he began, his voice dripping with faux concern. "I am glad you came. Look, nobody wants this to get ugly. We all know you are not, well, if you agree to unlock the system immediately and issue a public apology for your outburst, I am willing to drop the lawsuit. I will even offer you a small stipend to help you get back on your feet." Monica leaned forward, tapping her long, manicured fingernails on the glass table. "It is really for the best. Elena," she added, her voice sugary and poisonous. "Tech is so stressful. Maybe you should stick to something less demanding. We all know that high-level engineering is just a bit too much for you to handle emotionally." The lawyers chuckled softly, a rehearsed chorus of sycophants. I looked from Julian to Monica, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. I did not interrupt. I did not defend myself. I just smiled. It was a small ghost of a smile, the kind a predator gives before the kill. Julian shifted in his seat, loosening his tie. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Are you quite finished?" I asked softly. Marcus reached into his briefcase. He did not pull out a settlement offer. He pulled out a single, thick, leather-bound binder and dropped it onto the table with a heavy thud that echoed in the silent room. "We are not here to apologize, Julian," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. "And we are certainly not here to accept a stipend. We are here to serve notice regarding copyright infringement." Julian laughed, a loud, barking sound of disbelief. He looked at his lead counsel, shaking his head. "Copyright." Julian scoffed, leaning back with a smirk. "Marcus, please. You are embarrassing yourself. Elena wrote that code while employed by Stratum Logic. Everything she did on company time belongs to the company. That is basic corporate law. Did you skip that class in law school?" "Usually." "Yes," Marcus replied, his expression unreadable. "But you are forgetting the founding charter." Marcus opened the binder to page 15. The paper was yellowed with age, a stark contrast to the sleek tablets on the other side of the table. He spun the binder around and slid it toward Julian. "I suggest you read Clause 12. Section 4, Marcus said, the clause regarding original intellectual property retention." Julian frowned, his arrogance faltering for a microsecond. He looked down at the document. It was the original incorporation paperwork we had signed 10 years ago over cheap pizza and cheap wine. Julian had signed it with a flourish, too busy dreaming of his future billions to actually read the text. "It states clearly," Marcus continued, reciting the words from memory, "that any core algorithms developed prior to the official incorporation date remain the sole property of the creator and are merely leased to the entity known as Stratum Logic." So what Julian snapped, though his hand had started to tremble slightly. "She wrote Neuralink while we were building the company." "Actually," I spoke up, my voice calm and cold. "Check the dates. Julian, I registered the copyright for the Neuralink kernel architecture exactly 2 days before we signed that paper. Stratum Logic does not own the engine. Julian, you just rented it, and the lease has expired." I stood up, the movement fluid and deliberate. With a tap on my tablet, I hijacked the casting protocol of the conference room's main screen. The slide that appeared was not a marketing graph or a revenue projection. It was a digital certificate of authenticity, time-stamped and notarized by the United States Copyright Office. "This," I said, my voice resonating against the glass walls, "is the birth certificate of the Neuralink architecture. As you can see, the registrant is Elena Vance. The date is 48 hours prior to the incorporation of Stratum Logic." I turned to face the room, locking eyes with the chairman of the board, a man who had ignored me for 5 years. Clause 7 of the licensing agreement states that the right to use this code is contingent upon my employment. I continued, pacing slowly behind my chair. "Julian, when you fired me 30 days ago, you did not just terminate a wife. You terminated the contract. Since that moment, the license for Neuralink has expired." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of men watching a fortune evaporate. "That means," I added, dropping my voice to a lethal whisper, "that for the last 30 days, Stratum Logic has been operating on stolen intellectual property. Every patient scan, every data packet, every server request processed in the last month constitutes a separate act of federal copyright infringement. In total, I estimate the damages to be somewhere north of $2 billion. Julian's face had drained of all color. He looked like a man who had just realized his parachute was actually a backpack filled with rocks. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. But Elena, be reasonable," Julian stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "We are married. This is marital property. What is yours is mine." I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time, fueled by the sheer irony of his defense. "Oh, Julian," I said, shaking my head, "do you remember 10 years ago? You were so terrified that I was after your family's small trust fund. You insisted, absolutely insisted, that we sign a prenuptial agreement." Marcus slid a second document across the table. It was the prenup. Page 4, paragraph 3. I cited, "It explicitly states that any intellectual property created by either party prior to the marriage remains the sole and separate property of that individual. You wrote that clause to protect your mediocre college essays. Instead, you protected my life's work." Julian slumped back in his chair, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. "And regarding the so-called sabotage," I said, turning my attention to the screen where the error logs were displayed, "those were not viruses. That was the security protocol. The system is designed to lock down when it detects unauthorized users attempting to modify the core kernel. It was defending itself against incompetence." I looked directly at Monica. She was shrinking into her chair, her confidence shattered. "Monica," I asked, my voice deceptively gentle, "you tried to bypass the encryption last night, didn't you? You tried to copy the source code to a new server to strip my name from the headers. I had to," Monica whispered, her voice trembling. "Julian told me to. But the code, it was too complex. It started eating the data. I didn't know how to stop it." A collective gasp went through the board. The acting chief technology officer had just admitted to corrupting their own database in a failed attempt at theft. The board members turned their heads in unison toward Julian. Their eyes were no longer friendly. They were looking at a CEO who had lied to them, exposed them to massive liability, and handed the keys to the kingdom to an amateur. "The IPO is dead," one of the investors muttered, tossing his pen onto the table. I checked my watch. "Here is the reality," I said, delivering the final blow. "I am not renewing the license. I am taking my ball and going home. Stratum Logic has exactly 24 hours to purge every line of my code from your servers. If I find a single byte remaining after that deadline, I will file an injunction that will freeze your assets so fast your heads will spin. You have 1 day to shut down the core product of this company. Clock starts now." The sound of a man's ego shattering is surprisingly quiet, but the sound of his desperation is loud and pathetic. As the 24-hour countdown began ticking in the minds of everyone in the room, Julian crumbled. The confident CEO who had mocked me a month ago vanished, replaced by a terrified child realizing the dark is closing in. He bypassed the table, ignoring the shocked gasps of the board members, and actually fell to his knees in front of me. He reached for the hem of my white suit, his hands shaking violently. "Elena, please, you cannot do this," Julian begged, his voice cracking with panic. "Think about the employees. They have families, children. If you pull the license, the company dies. And think about us. 10 years. Elena, does that mean nothing to you?" I took a step back, ensuring his hands did not touch the fabric of my trousers. I looked down at him with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor that had finally been excised. "You did not think about the employees when you fired their CTO to boost your ego," I replied, my voice devoid of warmth. "And you certainly did not think about us when you handed me a separation agreement and smeared my name in the press to cover your own incompetence. This is business. Julian, you were right about one thing. I am not cut out for your kind of business. I prefer the kind where I actually own what I sell." I turned and walked out of the conference room, Marcus trailing behind me with a satisfied smirk. By the time we reached the lobby, Marcus had already executed the next phase of the plan. He leaked the details of the copyright dispute to the Wall Street Journal. The headline was brutal. "Stratum Logic built on stolen code founder accused of massive IP theft." The market reaction was instantaneous and violent. Within 2 hours, the gray market value of Stratum Logic shares plummeted. By the next morning, the company had lost 80% of its projected valuation. The IPO was not just canceled, it was incinerated. The investors, realizing they had poured millions into an empty shell, panicked. They did not just pull their funding, they demanded blood. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting that same afternoon. I was told it was the shortest meeting in the company's history. They voted unanimously to terminate Julian for cause, citing gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. They hoped that sacrificing him would appease me enough to stop the lawsuit, but the damage was already done. Julian lost everything. He had leveraged his entire equity stake in the company to secure high-interest loans for his penthouse, his McLaren, and his lavish lifestyle. When the share price hit zero, the banks issued margin calls that he could not meet. His assets were frozen, then seized. He was not just broke, he was drowning in debt and facing multiple fraud lawsuits from the very investors he had charmed for years. And then there was Monica. The moment the news broke that Julian was fired, her loyalty evaporated like mist. She did not stand by her man. She did not offer comfort. She packed her desk and left the building before security could even escort Julian out. 2 days later, I heard she was seen having dinner with the VP of our biggest competitor, likely spinning a story about how she was a victim of Julian's manipulation. I filed for divorce the following week. It was a simple proceeding, with the prenuptial agreement he had insisted on, and the mountains of evidence regarding his infidelity and financial ruin. The judge granted everything in my favor. I did not have to pay him a single dime of alimony. Julian was evicted from the penthouse we once shared. He was forced to sell his designer suits to pay for a moving truck. The last I heard, he was living in a cramped studio apartment in a rundown neighborhood in New Jersey, the kind with thin walls and flickering lights. He applied for jobs, but in the tight-knit world of New York tech, he was radioactive. He had become a punchline, a cautionary tale told to young founders. He was the man who had the golden goose but decided to starve her, only to realize too late that she was the one who controlled the feed. I did not sell the Neuralink source code. Offers poured in from Silicon Valley giants, checks written for astronomical sums that would have allowed me to retire to a private island in the Mediterranean. I shredded them all. I was done building castles for other people to live in. Instead, I founded Vance Innovations. The name was simple, unpretentious, and completely mine. The migration of talent was immediate. The engineers who had suffered under Julian's tyranny, The ones who had been shouted at for errors that were not their fault, resigned from stratum logic en masse. They came to me not because I offered them beanbag chairs or free beer, but because I offered them respect. Elena, is it true one of my lead architects asked me during his interview, his voice cracking with relief? Are you really running the engineering team yourself? I cannot go back to working for a salesman who thinks Python is a type of snake. You will never have to explain a line of code to a suit again. I promised him. Vance Innovations was not built on hype. It was built on functionality. Within 6 weeks, we released Neuralink 2.0. I personally oversaw the deployment for the National Hospital System. We eliminated the latency issue completely. When the first successful real-time brain surgery was performed using my software, without a single millisecond of lag, I did not throw a party with champagne. I simply went to the server room, listened to the hum of the machines, and felt peace. The world took notice. Forbes called again. This time, they did not want Julian. They put me on the cover. The headline read, "The New Queen of Tech, How Elena Vance Rebuilt an Empire from Ashes." I wore a black turtleneck in the photo, looking directly into the lens. No smile, just pure competence. It was at a renewable energy summit in San Francisco where I met David. He was an angel investor, but not the kind I was used to. He did not wear a flashy watch, and he did not interrupt me. After my keynote speech, he approached me while I was reviewing some data on my tablet. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice deep and calm. "I read your white paper on synaptic bridging last night. It was revolutionary. The way you optimized the data packets? I have never seen code so elegant." I looked up, expecting a pickup line. Instead, I saw genuine intellectual curiosity. David was handsome in a rugged, understated way, but what captivated me was that he was looking at my mind, not my body. We talked for 3 hours. We did not talk about stock prices or market shares. We talked about the future of human connectivity. "I would love to invest," David said as we finished our coffee, "but only as a silent partner. You are the captain of this ship. Elena, I just want to help buy the fuel." Our relationship grew slowly, rooted in mutual respect. There were no mind games. There was no gaslighting. For the first time, I was with a man who celebrated my strength rather than feeling threatened by it. Meanwhile, Julian was discovering that reputation is a currency you cannot print. I heard through the grapevine that he was applying for a mid-level sales position at a logistics firm, a humiliating step down for a man who used to fly private. "Mr. Thorne, your resume is impressive," the hiring manager reportedly told him, sliding his CV back across the desk. "But our clients value integrity above all else. Given the recent lawsuits and the public nature of your departure from Stratum, we simply cannot take the risk." The final image of our divergent paths came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was in the boardroom of a skyscraper in Midtown, signing a $1 billion exclusivity contract with a European biotech consortium. As I signed my name, ink flowing smoothly onto the paper, I happened to glance out the floor-to-ceiling window. Far below, on the wet pavement, I saw a figure huddled under a broken umbrella, looking up at the tower. It was Julian. He looked small. He looked cold, and from that height, he looked like nothing more than an ant. I capped my pen, turned back to David and the investors, and smiled. I had work to do. 2 years later, Vance Innovations was no longer just a startup. It was the market standard. We had grown so rapidly that we desperately needed more office space, and when the foreclosure auction for the old Stratum Logic Tower came up, I simply could not resist the poetic justice. I bought the building for pennies on the dollar. The first thing I did was renovate the 50th floor. I walked into Julian's old office, the sanctum where he had fired me, and I felt nothing but a cool sense of closure. I stripped away the mahogany desk and the pretentious oil paintings of himself. I turned the space into a relaxation lounge for the staff, complete with massage chairs and a coffee bar, where he once sat and plotted his ego trips. My engineers now sat and laughed over cappuccinos. It was the ultimate erasure of his legacy. It was in this very room, now filled with sunlight and happy employees, that security called to tell me I had a visitor. They said he refused to leave until he saw me. I told them to send him up. Julian walked in. He looked older, far older than the 2 years that had passed. His suit was ill-fitting, likely bought off a rack at a discount store, and his once charming smile was replaced by the nervous twitch of a man who had heard the word no too many times. He stood awkwardly by the espresso machine, looking out at the view he used to own. "Elena," he said, his voice raspy, "the place looks different. It looks like a place where people actually work." "Julian," I replied, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Why are you here?" He swallowed hard, wringing his hands together. "I have applied everywhere. Elena, no one will hire me. They all know. They all know what happened. I am losing my apartment next week. I just need a job. Anything. I will answer phones. I will fetch coffee. I just need a chance." I looked at him. I searched inside myself for anger, for pity, for any lingering thread of the love I once held for him. There was nothing, just a vast, quiet indifference. "You want a job?" I asked. "Yes. Please. I will work for minimum wage. I just need to get back on my feet," he pleaded, stepping closer. I shook my head slowly. "I do not hire people who undervalue the contributions of others." "Julian, that is a core value of this company. You built a career on taking credit for work you did not do, and when the foundation cracked, you tried to destroy the architect. That is a character flaw that no amount of training can fix. That is a lesson you have to learn. On your own." He stood there, frozen, realizing that the door was truly closed forever. He did not argue. He simply nodded, defeated, and turned to walk away. As he passed me, he smelled of stale tobacco and regret. I walked out of the lounge and down the hall to the private elevator. David was waiting for me in the lobby. He was leaning against the reception desk, chatting with the security guard about baseball. When he saw me, his face lit up. He did not rush to open the door for me like a servant, nor did he stride ahead of me like a master. He simply held out his hand. I took it. We walked out of the building side by side, equals in every sense of the word. That evening, I stood on the rooftop terrace of our new home, looking down at the glittering grid of New York City. The wind whipped through my hair, but I felt anchored. I realized then that the moment I chose to step back 2 years ago was not an act of surrender. It was the moment I stopped carrying dead weight. It was the moment I coiled the spring. Stepping back gave me the perspective to see the rot, and the momentum to launch myself higher than Julian could have ever dreamed. I did not need to prove anything to anyone anymore. My value was not in my title, my bank account, or the man standing next to me. My value was in the code running through the servers of hospitals across the country, saving lives in real time. My value was in my own mind and my own heart. I took a deep breath, inhaling the cold night air, and smiled. I had turned the ultimate betrayal into the ultimate empire. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to know. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.